The elevator doors closed and she said, "I need 40 seconds, and I need you to not say anything until I'm finished. Floor 12 to floor 1. 40 seconds was exactly right. I shifted my laptop bag to my other shoulder. I said nothing. She said, "I have been making your professional life difficult for 2 years. I've done it deliberately, and I've done it well, and I think we both know that. I've taken credit for things that were collaborative. I've talked over you in rooms where it mattered. I've let people assume the worst about you when I could have corrected them, and I didn't correct them." She was looking at the doors, not at me. Her voice was completely level. "I'm not going to do that anymore." Floor 9. She said, "That's it. That's what I needed to say. You don't have to respond." Floor 7. I said, "Why?" She looked at me then. First time in 40 seconds. First time in a long time that she'd looked at me like I was a person rather than a problem to be managed. She said, "Because I'm tired." The doors opened on one. She walked out. I stood in the elevator for 3 seconds after she was gone, watching the doors try to close on me, and thought, that is either the beginning of something or the end of something, and I have no idea which. Her name was Celestine Varga. She'd been at the firm for 4 years when I arrived, long enough to have established herself, not long enough to have stopped feeling the establishment as precarious. Senior associate, same track I was on, same narrow band of upward mobility we were both trying to occupy simultaneously. She had a precise mind and a specific kind of confidence that looks from the outside exactly like arrogance, and I had spent 2 years deciding that's what it was. Our first meeting was in a conference room on my 3rd day. She was presenting an analysis to the team, and I asked a question, genuinely, not to challenge her, because I didn't know enough yet to challenge anyone, and she answered it without breaking stride, without looking at me, in a tone that communicated very efficiently that the question had been beneath the level of the room. I felt the redness climb my neck. I noted it and set it aside. But I kept it. 6 weeks later, she took a project I'd been developing. Not stole, exactly, but absorbed. She brought it to our director with a framing that positioned it as her initiative and my involvement as a contribution. Not untrue. Not the whole truth. Our director thanked us both. Celestine thanked me in an email that was copied to the team and phrased in a way that made me sound like a research assistant. I did not say anything. I learned instead. I started documenting. I started being more deliberate about what I shared and when and in which rooms. I started treating every interaction with Celestine as a negotiation, which is exhausting, and which she appeared not to find exhausting at all, which told me something I wasn't sure how to interpret. The competition between us became a known thing, the kind of known thing that offices absorb and turn into shorthand. People mentioned us in the same breath. Comparisons were made. When one of us advanced on something, it was framed as a point in a game the other person was losing. I didn't create that framing, and I'm fairly certain Celestine didn't either. But we both inhabited it, and after long enough, inhabiting a frame and choosing it become difficult to tell apart. I had constructed, across 2 years, a complete and coherent account of Celestine Varga. She was calculating. She was territorial. She was the kind of brilliant that turns inward and becomes competitive rather than expansive. She was, in my accounting, a person I needed to watch. All of that was true. None of it was the whole truth. I understand that now. The elevator was a Thursday. The following Monday, she was in the small kitchen when I came in at 8. Making the specific kind of coffee that requires a French press and a patience I'd never had before 9, and she looked up when I walked in and said, "There's enough for 2 if you want." I set down my bag. I got a mug. She poured. We stood in the kitchen and drank coffee and didn't say anything for a minute, which is its own kind of communication. She said, "I'm not going to explain myself in front of people. In case you were wondering, what I said in the elevator, I'm not going to make it a thing at work. I just needed you to know." I said, "Why did you need me to know?" She wrapped both hands around her mug. She looked at the window above the sink, the one that faces the side street and gets no real light until 10. She said, "Because you're good at this. At the work. You're genuinely good, and I've spent 2 years behaving as if your being good were a problem I had to solve. And it's not. It's just true. And I got tired of pretending it wasn't." I said, "You've never made it seem like you thought I was good." She said, "I know." I said, "You made it seem like the opposite. I know that too." I looked at my coffee. I looked at her. I said, "What changed?" She set her mug down. Something moved through her face, not performed, not managed. The undefended version of Celestine Varga, which I'd never seen before, which was its own kind of information. She said, "My mother died 8 weeks ago. And I came back to work after the funeral, and I sat in a meeting watching us do the thing we do, the maneuvering, the positioning, the small strategic unkindnesses, and I thought, I do not have the energy for this anymore. I thought she would not recognize the person I've been in this building." She picked up the mug again. "That's what changed." The kitchen was very quiet. I said, "I'm sorry about your mother." She nodded. Once, the nod of someone who has received this sentence many times in 8 weeks and hasn't stopped needing it. I need to tell you what I understood in that kitchen, because it reframed everything that came before it. The thing I had called Celestine's arrogance was, on re-examination, something more specific. It was the particular armor of a person who had learned, at some point before I knew her, that rooms do not give you space, that you have to take it, or it will be taken from you. I knew this shape of armor. I recognized it, because I had built a version of it myself. The difference was that hers was older and more refined, and had calcified in ways mine hadn't yet, which is not a moral distinction. It's a timeline one. She had not, I began to understand, taken that project to damage me. She had taken it because taking was what she'd learned to do before someone else did. She had talked over me in rooms because silence, in her experience, was not patience. It was vacancy, and vacancy got filled. She had let the assumptions stand because correcting them would have required her to spend political capital on me, and she had not at that point decided I was worth it. None of that was kind. I am not rewriting it as kind. But kindness and explanation are different things, and understanding the shape of something is not the same as forgiving it, though it turns out it can be the first step toward it. What I hadn't understood was that she was watching me the same way I was watching her. That my documentation, my deliberateness, my careful room reading, she had seen it, had registered it, had interpreted it not as defensiveness but as competence, which it was, which I'd never let myself name out loud, because naming it felt like exactly the kind of thing Celestine would do, and I had decided not to become Celestine. She told me this later. She said, "You learn fast, and you hold your cards close, and you never let them see you rattled." I told myself I found that annoying. I found it annoying because I respected it. She said the competition was easier than the alternative. I said, "What was the alternative?" She said, "Admitting I was in the same room as someone I actually wanted to learn from." That's not a comfortable thing to want. We did not become friends overnight. I want to be honest about the shape of it, because the shape matters. What happened was slower and stranger and more specific than friendship, initially, it was a recalibration. We started having the conversations we'd been having around each other's edges, the real ones, the analytical ones, the conversations about the work where we were both fully there rather than 1/3 there and 2/3 calculating. It turned out that Celestine and I, stripped of the competition, were the most interesting people in each other's professional world. Not because we agreed, we disagreed constantly. On methodology, on instinct, on the right level of risk at the right moment, but because the disagreements were generative rather than territorial. She pushed my thinking. I pushed back. Something better than either starting point usually emerged. Our director noticed within 3 weeks. She called us both into her office and looked between us with the particular expression of someone trying to decide if they are being played. She said, "What happened?" Celestine said, "We decided the other approach wasn't working." Our director looked at me. I said, "It was a resource allocation problem. We were competing for the same space when we could be expanding it." Our director considered this for a moment. She said, "Well, whatever it is, keep doing it." She paused at the door. "You're both more interesting to work with when you're not trying to destroy each other." 4 months after the elevator, we were working late on a deadline that had moved 3 times and that neither of us had caused, and both of us were going to be blamed for if we didn't close it by morning. It was 11:30. The office was empty. Celestine had taken her heels off an hour ago. I had eaten a granola bar for dinner and deeply regretted it. We were going to make the deadline. We both knew it with about an hour to go. The particular loosening that comes when the hard part is behind you, even if the work isn't finished, settled over the room. She said, without looking up from her screen, "Can I tell you something?" I said, "Go ahead." She said, "I almost didn't do it. The elevator. I talked myself out of it twice before I walked in." I said, "What made you do it?" She considered this, still looking at her screen. She said, "I kept thinking about my mother, about what she would say if she could see the person I'd built in this building. She had no patience for smallness. She called it smallness. Holding grudges, guarding territory, needing to win." She said, "Life is long and then it isn't. And you will spend a lot of it at work, and the people you work with are the ones who know you in a way no one else does. And you owe it to yourself to let them know something worth knowing." She paused. I kept thinking, what is Celestine at work showing people? What are they learning about me? And the answer was something I didn't want to be remembered as. She looked up. "You were the only one I needed to say it to," she said. "Not because you were the only one I'd been unfair to. Because you were the one it cost the most." I looked at her for a moment. At the person across from me, who was not the person I'd built in my head across 2 years. The real one, with her heels off and her hair escaping its arrangement, and her mother 8 weeks gone and her hands still working at 11:30 at night because the work mattered even now. I said, "For what it's worth, I wasn't always fair to you either." She said, "I know." A very small smile. "I know you know that." "I was building a case," I said. "Every interaction, collecting evidence. So was I. We were building cases against each other instead of just talking," she said. "Yeah," she looked back at her screen. "Well," she said, "we're talking now." "We are," I said. "Better late," she said. "Better late," I agreed. We finished the report at 12:47 in the morning, and she proofread my sections, and I proofread hers without being asked. And we sent it, and closed our laptops and rode down in the same elevator, in a comfortable silence. Which was the specific inversion of where this had started. The same 40 seconds. The same 2 people. a completely different gravity. On the ground floor, she said, "Good night, Nadia." First time she'd used my name in 2 years. Maybe ever, in a way that meant it. I said, "Good night, Celestine." What I know now that I didn't know then. The person you have decided is your rival has a version of the story where you are theirs. You have both been collecting evidence. You have both been building the case. And the case is coherent and internally consistent, and probably contains a significant amount of truth. And it is also missing the parts that don't fit the narrative, because that is what a case is, a selection, not a picture. The full picture of Celestine included a woman who came back from her mother's funeral and looked at the life she'd built and found it smaller than she'd meant it to be. The full picture included someone who had practiced being hard for so long that hard had become the default, and who had gotten tired of the practicing. The full picture included 40 seconds in an elevator and enough courage to use them. I had a full picture too, and she had been building it without my permission the same way I'd been building hers. And what she found in it, when she finally looked, was something worth being fair to. That is the whole story. Two people who decided the maintenance of an argument was costing more than the argument was worth. Two people who stopped collecting evidence against each other and started, incrementally, collecting something else. The work got better. That mattered. But what mattered more was simpler than that. I got a year back. The year I would have spent in a building with someone I had decided to treat as an enemy, sharpening myself against them, spending the energy that could go into the work instead, into the maneuvering around it. She gave me that year back in 40 seconds in an elevator, and I will not pretend I deserved it, because I'd been doing the same thing she was doing, and I hadn't been the one to stop. She stopped first. She walked into that elevator first. That is worth something I don't have a word for. There is someone at your job right now. Maybe it's been months, maybe years, and you have a story about them that is coherent and internally consistent, and that you have told so many times it has become simply true, and you have not examined it recently, and you have not asked whether the story is the person or whether the story is the collection. When did you last wonder what case they have been building about you? What would happen if one of you walked into an elevator and used 40 seconds to stop pretending? And what is the cost, measured honestly, of another year of the alternative? Subscribe. These are the stories about the 40 seconds that change everything.